We're live.
Thanks for coming. How you feeling? Appreciate you showing up even though bodies are bodies.
My head hurts.
I don't even know exactly where my phone is right now. It's always on silent. It's never not on silent.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably somewhere logical.
This works, right? Isn't it? Yeah, it's not for second. I mean, I've heard about it, obviously.
It might be a cash register.
Right. Nice place to bottle you. I love all the zines too, so you know, I've got a mini zine vending machine. Yeah, I know. I still need to make a mini zine for you. I know. I haven't. Go on. So did you come direct? Stop by my friend's house for flowers. Hung out. Thanks, clothes. Cool. Something cute. Cool. Started travel clothes. As you do. As I did. Yeah. Except I got it yesterday. How was your yesterday? Long and boring? Yep, good. Honestly, that sounds better than long and frustrating. Yeah, no, well, I go through the gorge, so I go through the Ecoe and then I get it's up to my area. All that. It's like all. I know.
Andrew says hello.
What's up, Andrew?
He's watching from the car right now. He's on vacation.
Well, technically he's not on vacation yet if he's in the car. I would argue.
I don't think he'll be on vacation at this entire thing. He'll just be doing work the entire time.
No distracted driving, Andrew. We appreciate you showing up.
We're going to assume Garrett's driving.
Oh, good.
Harrison. I still finally meet you.
I know.
Congrats. Thank you. Awesome. Very exciting. I know.
Right?
I'd say so.
What do you say?
Thanks a lot about it.
A lot of us talk about doing that.
I know. It's gonna.
No, but I want to see the other ones. The comments beforehand.
Crazy. She's not just a random person saying your facts that you're gonna have to.
You know, I was figuring that there was kind of a connection.
Oh, you know a lot about the elder, huh? It's almost, yeah. All I see is my dad. What's your dad? Jogging business.
Joseph hang out.
I want to take him up to Douglas Lake. Up at Hospital. I was like, we should take Douglas
When I just went to, we stayed right here at Dennis.
You know where you live?
Not here.
Not in Texas. Sorry, Texas. In Dallas? It's not too soft in Dallas.
No. Houston is worse than Dallas.
That's cool.
Yes. Just to get to the airport in Dallas, you have to go through that.
That's capitalism at its finest. Well, sometimes she just says things that aren't. Most of the time she just says things. It's like, filter, Mom.
Y'all aren't specifically waiting for anyone there.
They'll mean her on the way at some point, but
But we
that's what
we
they
don't-
get for stopping to get food.
Yeah.
There. Okay, well, and are we ready over here?
Yeah, we're all good.
Okay, awesome. Well, maybe I'll start with a little introduction. Hey folks, welcome to Firestorm. Thanks for coming out this afternoon on a beautiful day when you could have been doing so many different things, but you're here with us, which we greatly appreciate, and we think it's going to be worth your time. We're here to celebrate the release of a new collection of Water Never Ceasing, which if you want to wave it, I don't have a copy to wave in my hands. Perfect, thank you. But a couple little housekeeping things. This is Firestorm Books. We're an 18-year-old worker cooperative here in Asheville. And we are run by a queer feminist collective. And while you're here, if there's anything that you need, please feel free to chat with me or one of my coworkers who you can likely find over at the register. There's a bathroom in the building on the far side down the little hall. There's also a water fountain there. Please stay hydrated. If you need to stretch your legs or move around or get some air, feel free to stand up and exit through either of the two front doors, the one you came in probably, and then the one that is directly behind you. I do want to mention that today we are able to offer Of Water Never Ceasing at half of cover price, thanks to a generous community donor who's covering the other half, to increase accessibility of books during events at Firestorm. So today is the perfect day to grab a copy and get it signed. Before we get started here, I'm just going to share some short bios. So, of course, we have Kristin Entler, who is a writer and educator from Alabama, currently living in Western North Carolina. They hold an MFA in poetry from the University of Arkansas and an MA in creative writing from the University of Alabama at Birmingham. Their work can be found in The Bitter Southerner, Gulfstream Literary Magazine, Porterhouse Review, Booth, and elsewhere. Kristin, thank you for being here to share your book with us.
Thank you for having me.
We also are privileged to have H.M. Cotton in conversation with Kristin. H.M. is the managing editor of Birmingham Poetry Review, contributing editor of Nell, and production manager for both journals. Her writing appears in places such as the Raleigh Review, Story South, and Smoke Long Quarterly. She's an MFA student at Warren Wilson and teaches at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. Thank you so much for being here with us. I'm going to just pass you the mic, and for yours, just make sure to click up when you're ready.
Yeah, thank you so much.
What?
You have a book.
I have a book.
This is awesome, dude.
you.
So, for those of you that don't know, we're friends. We go way back. We did both the undergraduate and graduate degrees at UAB. So I was working on my MA while you were coming through with your undergrad. And then we just kind of stuck around, hung out, taught, worked in the writing center, wrote poetry together, went all over town reading poems.
Went to so many bars.
Yeah, lots of that. So to be able to get to celebrate this launch with you is a true honor and a pleasure, and I'm so excited to be able to do so. So like, all the congratulations to you. When we first got started talking about this book, I asked you if you could describe this collection as a color. You said blue, obviously. Do you still hold to that?
Partially.
Okay. In what ways has that answer changed?
I also think purple. So it's a hard question to answer because there's so many colors that I use throughout the book. It was actually a running joke in my MFA workshops about oh, there's a color in a poem, it must be Entler's poem or whatever. And you used another color, and I think a lot of that is the first class we took, or I took and you sat in on, was an crisis poetry class, which is poems about writing about artworks. And so I think being raised by an artist also makes me inclined towards color. But I also think the collection Blue by Maggie Nelson? Yep, one of those. Also comes the color blue is so rich and deep and has so many different varying things about it that come up, I think, both in this book and just generally. But then the color purple always also comes to me. Partially because purple is the color for CF awareness, and so since it's a book about CF, that feels apt.
Cool.
Yeah.
For our viewers who may not know what CF is.
Yes, cystic fibrosis is a genetic disease that I was born with. This book is a lot about living with CF. It causes mostly lung problems for me. Different bodies are different, so of course different people have different symptomatology based on what they experience. But mine is mostly in my lungs. It also can affect the digestive tract. Also, pretty much everywhere in your body that there is mucus, it can affect. So mine's mostly lungs, so that's a lot about what I write about.
And then when I asked you to encapsulate your collection in 3 words, you said wilderness, community, sustenance, which are like such delicious words to begin with anyway, but I wonder what leads you to reach for those 3 descriptors.
A lot of things. So community, being disabled inherently means you have to be dependent on other people for your survival, not just medical needs. Like, it takes a team of community of scientists and really smart people doing really smart things every day, working really hard to make, for instance, the medication that came out in 2019 that is like the reason that I am as healthy as I am to be able to do this. And I wouldn't be allowed to any of those people, but also like the people in my close community who, when you're sick, show up and bring soup, or having a mom and dad who take care of me when I physically can't like make it from the bed to the shower or whatever is happening that day. Community, wilderness, you're gonna have to remind me of the 3 as I go. Wilderness, because one thing that I think about a lot, and that I thought about a lot in writing this book, is how disability is natural. It's a natural consequence of having a body. And every wild animal that exists can be born with different genetic, mutations, deficiencies, differences, whatever word you want to use. So like piebald deer, that's a genetic mutation. Dolphins can be born with spina bifida, which is a really cool thing to know that I learned the other day in Googling this. So just everywhere you look in nature, there's those examples, and that felt really important in pushing back against the societal concepts that disability is something unnatural or that is wrong or bad, because that's just not true. And then the 3rd word, sustenance, goes back to that medical need, right? Like, what keeps me alive is different than what keeps non-disabled people alive. Medicines, I have a different diet I'm supposed to be on, a lot of salt, a lot more salt than most people are supposed to have. So things like that. There's all these little things that come together in these really subtle ways that aren't generally in the conversation when we're talking about disability.
Yeah. So speaking of genetics actually sets us up for me to ask you for our first poem. So would you read for us the Song for Genetic Illness on page 7?
I will.
7 if you got it. If you don't got it, go get it. Right there.
I'll sell some books. Yeah. Song for Genetic Illness and Imagined Parental Guilt. I'm glad you picked this one to go first with, because I do think it sets it up really nicely. It's one of the few poems I have that actually names cystic fibrosis. And it's after Song by Bridget Keegan Kelly, if anybody's familiar. Listen, when she was born, they were told she was fine. Was just a preemie. But 6 months old, and their child only the size of a womb-fresh bundle, they knew something wasn't right. The name of her ghost arrives after months of searching for the right person to look at the right organ, run the right test. In a hazel-eyed physician's broad pink mouth, cystic fibrosis. And all at once, she's lucky to see the age of 10, then 13, 18, 20, 33. A median age is never a promise. He says it's what caused her failure to thrive. He calls it that, failure to thrive. They know only that she's too small, has never put on weight right, that every day of her still short life, they've held her tiny body over an open garbage bag as she throws up all the milk she's drunk the day before. She falls back asleep. No use in watching her breathe. They turn to the sun, pounding its rays like a prayer over the stand of long-leaved pines at the edge of the lake. With each new study comes hope in the form of scientific evidence. They only need to keep her alive long enough for science to catch up to this body that is no one's fault. The doctor's words hardly cut through the fugue shock. But there's a nurse who puts her hand on their shoulders. Her hair makes her look like a young John Lennon, and she promises, with her swimming pool eyes, that their daughter can be okay. It's a slim comfort in the face of an infant coughing as hard as the full-grown adult they know she likely won't be able to become. And the first time they hear the word disabled, it drips like honey down the nursery walls. A palpable grief for a future when it'll be their job to make joy for the disappointment she has in her own body. They'll promise her it's temporary, that she only has to hang on long enough for science to figure out how to fix her mutated genes she knows they're sorry to have passed down.
So this song, you say that it's an after by Bridget Jean Kelly, which is one of the techniques that poets use. Like poetry is a long conversation of tradition. So poets frequently write afters after other poets, and that sort of leads us into nerdy craft talk. So as a poet, I want to get to like the words and how you put them together. We, in our first degree together, were raised in a very strong formal tradition, and some of that appears in the book. Like it's like a gesture or reference to, while also at the same time sort of like loosely falling away from it. We often talk about like, in order to break the rules, you first have to know the rules, right? So we did a lot of learning of the rules to begin with, and then a lot of breaking of the rules after. So in a glimpse of looking towards form and looking towards craft, would you read for me the Ubi song on page 43?
Ooh, yes. Picking all the ones I read last night for reading too.
There's only so many poems in the book.
Okay, write a longer book, is that what I'm hearing?
I'll write another one.
Working on it.
So for you to get a glimpse of what it looks like on the page, you've got these short 3-stanza lines. So go for it.
Yeah, these are also meant to, they scan out as haikus as well, for anybody interested in that kind of thing. Ubi sunt for hatchlings and their mother. Unretractable flippers, paddle wet on sand, sound lost in ocean's crash that spits her out in front of us. Dark shadow, sliding slow, a sloth, tethered to high tide's gravity. She feels for dunes under her chin, stops. Back legs dredge a hole beneath her. 53 whole minutes. We see her maternal muscles shiver instinct. A prayer to the moon. Her clutch of eggs now separate from her for good, she frenzies a sand tornado to protect these gems from a world she can't control. She moves faster now than her trek inland. Pain settled in the shore slope toward the ocean's tongue. The moon's light guides her far from coyotes and fox and her midnight clutch.
I love it. So I celebrate anytime I see a turtle in one of your poems because I know how much you absolutely love turtles. And this poem here very much is a marrying of those two obsessions, poetry and turtles, what with the scanning out as haikus. So can you talk a little bit about like what led you to the making of this poem?
We went on a trip to the Archie Carr Wildlife Refuge in Florida, which if you go, bring bug spray. My top tip, got eaten alive, but it was gorgeous. There were, I think we saw like 7 or 8, maybe like a little more than that, sea turtles come up onto the shore, walk up onto the shore, and lay their eggs, or some of them not lay their eggs and turn around and have a false crawl. And there's just something about like sea turtles and the dichotomy of like something that breathes air but lives in the water that feels very relatable to me as somebody who lives in the not water but is drowning internally some percentage of the time. So that metaphor really kind of carries all of the sea turtle poems in the book. That was very intentional.
You just said the words false crawl.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
About 40 to 50% of mama sea turtles that crawl up onto the beach turn around without laying their eggs. And you can tell it's a false crawl because you can see the turtle tracks. She comes up and she just turns around and she stops, right? Like it's obvious. They don't know why that happens. They don't like, my theory is that like false labor pains are a thing. Like why would you think that other animals don't have that? Just because like mammals have it. It could just be like maybe that spot isn't good. Like she crawls up and she's like, oh, this is too close to the water. My babies will get pulled back out to sea. There's a similar statistic for people who are on lung transplant and organ transplant lists that about 40 to 50% of transplants are called a dry run, which is like you go get back to the OR, you get put to sleep, you wake up, you have the same lungs that you went to sleep with. For some reason, the donor lungs weren't compatible. They don't always know that until they get both you and the lungs together and run the test to make sure. And there's just something about that like percentage being really close that felt useful to me as a poet.
I love it. And what made you choose to write this poem in haikus? Was that a deliberate decision, or was that something that came after?
Yeah, Davis McCombs, one of the phenomenal instructors at the University of Arkansas, does a lot of haiku work in his workshops. So we all end up leaving the MFA with a handful of haiku. But even before then, I think the haiku is a really accessible form because it is so short and like it is so syllabic. I think syllabics are really accessible more than scansion because like not everybody can hear the beats and like that takes a lot more practice and learning. But like counting syllables is easy. And there's something about that like small package that just really draws to me. And it's easier to find like an image in that condensed form than it is to like it takes away the space for fluff and like over explanation where you just have to get down to the rawest form of what is it you're trying to show to the reader.
So speaking of haikus, I also want you to read The Girl with a Pearl in Her Wrist, which is a haibon, which is a prose poem that ends in a haiku. So I don't know if you want to talk more about that before, after, whatever, but this is one of my favorite ones, so please delight me.
This was actually from one of Davis's workshops. This is really fun. He did moon viewing parties every semester for the MFA, which is like the most MFA thing. Like,
Yeah.
you have to go read poems to the moon for class credit.
Every poet is in love with the moon.
It's a thing. There's
It's
so
just
many
a thing.
It is just a thing. It's a joke. Inside joke. Yeah, in this one, it was write a high bun for class. Have fun. And then we had to read these at the moon viewing party. The girl with a pearl in her wrist, where the bones meet. Right there, below the pinky's metacarpal line. She knows it is a pearl because the doctors told her so. A Baroque pearl, according to her medical charts. The notations read that this is a best guess. That the only way to know the anatomy of the joint composite would be to biopsy. Every doctor so far recommends she let them prod her tender ligaments. She has always refused. It would be an invasive bandaging procedure, and after, she would no longer hold her body's final secret for herself. When cradled in the palm of her left hand, she can feel its glow like a fevered wound. Some nights, her body gives in to this insomnia. Drawn to the dune line empty-handed, she carves a hole only she can fit, and without apology, accepts what she cannot change. Hot white thunder moon, sargassum blooms still soggy, tide swallows body.
Mm-hmm. So, talk to me about form and what form has meant to you, and like the subversion of form, and how you employ it, how you refrain from it. How do you work with it?
Throughout writing these poems in particular, I really rejected the idea of form. I was like, no, I'm not writing poems in form. I'm not thinking about form. So when everyone, like, as this book started coming out, more people are reading it, and everyone's like, oh, there's so much formalism in here. And I'm like, that is a surprise to me. It was not necessarily an intention, and I do think, like what you're saying, like you learn what the rules are to break them, and that doesn't always happen consciously. Sometimes when you're making art, especially when you're making art in a regimented, academia structure like the MFA, where it's like you have a due date on this day and you have a poem due whether you have the inspiration for that poem or not. And so I think those tics that you learn those early years start coming out, right? So it's like I grab haiku a lot when I'm in a space of not being able to think about what's right, that writer's block. Mm-hmm. I end up being like, okay, well I can write a few syllables. I can write a 5-7-5. That's easy enough.
Real talk, during my first thesis, I ran into like writer's block right at the end, and I went to O. Henry's coffee shop downtown, and I sat there and I said, I am not getting up from the spot until I write a poem. And I was like, well, dang, what's the shortest poem I can possibly write? And I wound up writing a series of like haikus because it just, I don't know what it is. It just breaks you out of it, right?
It does. The image, that was me both in O. Henry's and in the Five Guys Next Door.
Very nice. So also I noticed in your acknowledgement section that you referred to a Dantean translation course, and I know that you've also been working with translation as well, which is something that's really cool. So, and not only that, your sort of introduction to the book. Oh, how time hangs and drags till our aid comes. A quote from Dante. So can you speak of both the influence that Dante and also translation have had on your personal practice, even if you're not explicitly writing about Dante or translation?
Yeah, I think the translation work, because my translation work is in Old Icelandic, because I decided to pick the hardest and most obscure thing I could possibly translate.
Of course you did.
Of course I did. And that is where the Nordic influences that are in this book come in from. Just like reading the Old Norse poetic saga, the stories of like Thor and Odin and all of those pagan gods.
How is translation?
Yes, thank you. And translate, like the idea of like just anytime I work with translation, it's almost freeing because you're working with somebody else's words. So it's like, I don't have to think about what to say. It's already said. I just have to find the word that is expressing the vibe here the best, which is a very like boiled down notion of translation, but you get what I mean. I'm not having to like mine my own trauma for content. The content is already there. I just have to play with it. And so like having that space between it and having that influence and the inspiration of someone else's words and someone else's ideas helps anytime like writing in any other genre does that. So like writing fiction helps with poetry and vice versa. And Dante in particular, that Dante class was so good. Dr. Duvall is so smart. And I was very lucky to take that class right before he retired and get that genius knowledge in before he left. And there's something about like Dante in particular, these rings of like inescapable hell, where it kind of starts to feel like the punishment isn't going to hell, but the punishment itself is the endlessness of like, this is always what we're gonna do. And I wrote a lot of these poems, or all of these poems, except like maybe one was pre-COVID, but almost all of them have been written in COVID times. And that never-endingness was very prominent, especially like, you know, the years 2020 to 2023 is when a lot of these were written. So that almost like pre-vaccine, really like what is gonna happen time felt very, I have this like, there was a moment where I was taking my dog Azzy out and like looking up at the moon, because of course I was. And that line just kind of like stuck with me, and I was like, oh, that's what the hell actually is the not knowing. It's not like the punishment itself of, like what's one of the hell punishments in Dante?
There is one for poets.
Yes, the basking like a lizard in the sun, the being a lizard in the sun one. That's not the poet's one, but that's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah, this is what life always is, and will it ever get better or worse? And I think our brains crave novelty, and that not having novelty in that way is, living with disability also feels like that a lot of the times, right? Like we have to have science to be that aid, and we are just hanging in there until that aid does come.
So this leads me a lot to think about structure. So we've got like form, and then we have like past traditions. We have someone like Dante who his Inferno, I mean, it's political. You know, he is putting big political figures in these different rings of hell, and that is meant to be a social commentary of the time.
It also sounds so cathartic to do.
No. I have written a poem or two for the people who I could not,
You gotta put them somewhere. You gotta do something about it.
Right? So that leads me to want to talk about like poetry as politics, poetry as advocacy. Like, what is the role of poetry, and like, what do you want this book to do in the world?
I think just like telling your experience and telling your story. I think there's something really underrated about the advocacy work of just sharing experience. Like it's so hard to convince somebody to do something with just a statistic. Like what is a statistic to somebody unless you're part of that group that's being affected, but getting somebody to feel with you and like, it's the whole reason we tell stories, you know? Yeah.
Do you have a favorite poet who also leans more towards like open political work, advocacy, things of that nature?
There's a deaf, hard of hearing poet called Raymond Antrobus who does such a good job doing the work of here's my experience without hitting you over the head with, and here's what you need to do about it politically. Because I think there's space in the book of like sharing the experience, and then like maybe there's an opening to suggest a solution, but that's like a poetry book isn't always the place for that. And I think he does a really good job of balancing like, hey, here's just what this reality is, and like experience this with me for a minute, and then when you go back into your world, maybe you've changed a little bit, or you can think differently about how something might not be accessible to somebody with, you know, a different set of like disabilities or abilities or experiences.
Yeah. So when we first started talking about this conversation, we talked about this being a COVID book, a lot because it was developed during like COVID time period, but also because I mean we're talking about CF, we're talking about, you know, a lung-oriented condition. So so much of COVID has like rocked your world in that regard. But you also said that to mention COVID in this book would mean that people would put it down.
Yeah.
Right? So in what ways have you subverted that form of expectation?
I think like just one direction. I mean, I know when I read a poem that has COVID in it, it makes me want to like step back and be like, oh, we have to remember now, right? But getting people to think about, you know, well, air safety is about more than COVID anyway, right? Like there are other viruses besides that one that can do a lot of damage. Tuberculosis can be airborne, colds, the flu, etc. And so I think also putting it down to just COVID also reduces the expansive danger that's out there in a lot of ways. And because it's this sort of collective trauma that is hard to process and like put ourselves back in that space when we mention it, we also do it a disservice from letting people take their own step back and be like, all right, what is this actually about? Like, what is actually the value system that the things that are supposed to protect us that we start talking about in COVID were about? And kind of breaking through that defense mechanism.
Yeah. This is a collection that has a lot of emotional depth to it. Like I see joy, I see wonder, I see frustration, and I see some isolation and loneliness as well. So I was wondering if you would read for me, please, on Being Born a Lungfish on page 5.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah, when I wrote this one, I was like, oh, that's the first poem. On being born a lungfish. Not all monsters are evil. Omnivorous, sure. But hunger does not mean spite or vengeance or oppression, just survival. Benign. I'll digest myself if it means waking up to summer. A mucus cocoon outside the body makes more sense than the internal membranes drowning mammals alive. Prehistoric as in stubborn, as in evolution despite the odds. 5 to 1, 1 in 4 on a Punnett square, estivation, endangered fossil, as in protected, as in scientists study my respiratory system, my primitive limbs, how I survive in the crater of an elephant's footprint for what feels like endless years, this dry season of lonely metabolism.
And the idea of like systems and what takes place, so much of this book looks to the internal, about what's happening with the body, but also to the external, to society, to the people that you're engaging with, to the environment and environmental concerns. There's a lot of parallelism in that as well. And so when we talk about the body, I was wondering if you would read for me Maslow's hierarchy of needs on page 50.
Mm-hmm. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is bullshit. Imagine the chronically ill body often, but not always, on fire. Flames bloom and metastasize, bone pain sharp, lung tissue constricts, throat scratched by hellhounds. Imagine the body's owner, heaving in and out of flaming, without reprieve from either the pain or the appointments, doctors, needles, tests that perpetuate pain, searching for answers in DEXA and CAT scans that rarely answer where anyone expects. Then, side effects. Crippling nausea, supernova headaches caused by the nausea medicine, anemia from the third antibiotic cocktail, oral and inhaled in tandem that still don't stunt or calm, IV lines busting veins, appetite poor, irritation, depression. Imagine all of this without music, without TV, without tattoos that make your body into a somewhere worth surviving. I guess something too to give to folks who might not know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a psychology theory that, like, in order to reach the top peak of the pyramid of self-actualization, you have to satisfy all of the needs that come below it in that pyramid. And it goes from like basic physiological needs at the bottom to artistic and like emotional fulfillment needs at the top. So the kind of like the idea behind it is like you can't find personal fulfillment in your arts or in like your relationships or in your personal emotional self until you have like stable food source and water and sleep needs. And that's just like not how our bodies function. We create art even if we're hungry. We have the need to be creative. Like I never have assuredness that my body is going to function, but I still write poems and make art. And so it's that idea that you have to complete one thing before the next instead of these needs being parallel to each other and always like in conversation with each other is what kind of inspired that title in that poem.
What does your creative life look like as far as like how you feed yourself creativity, but then also how you sit down to produce your experience?
Nature, just like going outside, finding the images. The idea that like nature has already probably come up with the concept that you are wanting to write about is very something that I think about a lot, which is a quote, a very misrepresented quote from Kaveh Akbar of an Instagram post he posted. But yeah, that idea that just going out and sitting, and that also making myself like, I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna sit here in this spot until I write something. And then I'm gonna be like, yeah, I'll just write a haiku and then I can go have a snack.
So like the theme of this year, folks, is just like you need more haikus in your life.
Yeah,
right?
So you should buy my book because there's so many in
there. The next poem on the list that I would like for you to read is There's a Pig Pen in Her Lungs on page 58.
Mm-hmm. This one comes from a doctor who was a pediatric pulmonologist that I had who had some really great metaphors. And he was once saying that, well, there's just a pig pen in there and we just gotta like, and I was like, well, that's offensive. One, like, did you think about that before it came out of your mouth? I don't think you did, but that's fine. And he's like, the way he explained it, like, undid that initial, like, hey. But yeah, there's a pig pen in her lungs. The doctor explains her infection by way of metaphor. Her amalgamation of infections have become a sty. Impossible to separate a speck of mud from a cluster of Pseudomonas cells, from an aspergillosis colony, and the sound of her cilia struggling air across her chronically over mucous membranes. And she supposes the wheezes her body makes could sound like a sick hog. Her deep breaths trigger coughing fits. To treat the fungal infection means feeding the bacteria, as is the case with these things, the doctor says. Unable to listen, she swallows a muddy clump in her trachea, as if burying it in stomach acid will help. There are sea turtles on this doctor's bow tie, and she hopes one day she can hear her body as more than an animal in the need of survival. The excess of salt on her skin, a constant holding her breath.
I found another turtle.
Yeah, you did.
I want y'all to hear these two lines again. And she supposes the wheezes her body makes could sound like a sick hog. Her deep breaths trigger coughing fits. So I'm one who loves the taste of language, and I especially love when language mimics what it's trying to encapsulate in that moment. So to have, yeah, I know, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to have, and she supposes the wheezes in such a register of a wheeze, or to have breath triggers coughing fits, right? To have that sort of guttural, deep in the lungs sort of like sound. Oh, I love that. I love that. Very, very artistic. Good job, bud. Thank you. Okay, next up on the list. I'll eventually need new lungs. Page 60, please. It's also on the back. It is also on the back, but it also has a turtle in it.
Was your goal to try to see how many turtle poems you could fit?
That may or may not be a personal goal of mine.
Okay, just checking.
I'm just saying.
Yeah. I'm sensing the thing.
You found a way to put them in the collection. We might as well just like revel in them all.
I mean, they're here. I'll eventually need new lungs. Also, just as a quick note, I love writing dream poems. They're so fun. You just say whatever the hell you want. It doesn't matter.
You can actually just do that anyway.
You can, but people question you less if it's in a dream.
I love it.
In a dream, spring arrives as a real deluge. Leaves heaving her name through the door. Night consumed and improbably sick. Suds dripped walls like a construction site. Fine metal cold. Cotton candy pink insulation exposed, swollen like a stomach. Stars fall in the yard, make holes in the roof, and leave behind ashy bruises on an unlucky single night blooming ceres. And attached to an IV pole, large as a chandelier, she drags, ocean bound. Stitches visible under the flimsy blue gown, a broken string of pearls, tide cracked sand dollars, and the U-turn of a sea turtle's false crawl.
There's that false crawl.
There it is.
So in writing of the body and in writing about systems and in what ways you're holding to form and you're subverting form, you're being bound by systems, you're subverting systems, you're finding community, which is its own system. In all of that, there's the queerness of the book as well. So you're really going through like multiple layers of identity here, and I would be absolutely remiss if we didn't like dive into that and talk about that. And so much of what gets presented as queerness, like historically, you know, there's a whole like Hays Code and everything, and how like you can't show a queer character without them also having to suffer. So to have the coming out as joy. I would love for you to bring that poem in that space, in this space, as like a celebration, as in queerness is not trauma. Queerness is beautiful and lovely, and you've got the poem in it here.
What page is that on?
Half a second. 21.
Yeah, one thing too that is important to me about how these two identities go together is that like my disability is very much a part of my queerness. Like it makes up part of my queerness. It makes my like living in the world in a different way, in a similar sort of box, kind of if that makes any sense. Identity is so tricky to talk about. But yeah, I think like without being disabled, my queerness would be very different, and those two things are very inseparable. And at the same time, like I moved through the world as a disabled person first, and then as a queer person second. Like people, I have to be more careful, like especially with COVID, like leaning forward in my disability and protecting my disability. So all of the other conversations around queerness just is like, well, but this is more directly threatening to my livelihood right now. That doesn't mean that I'm not also queer, of course, but just the way those two things get balanced is different than a non-disabled queer person, I think. But a coming out poem that ends in joy. On the other side of my Nana's kitchen window, hummingbirds sip nectar from a trumpet vine, and I know her forest yard keeps her saying, in seasons when surprises pile up in the sink like spoons. And when I finally tell her, it is long after the hydrangeas turn paper white, drop to dirt. She tells me she saw a mama deer birth twin foals last week, that she calls them sweetie, that she knew the whole time.
In this as well, would you read the poem on page 41?
Yeah. If I forgive myself, today's gender can be anything. A great blue heron sunning wings wide on a broken pier, or a clematis vine covered in whirligig baby bulbs, a deer complacent with losing its spots, a stump speckled with moss and mushrooms, a line of red ants with a feast over their heads, a sun's aluminum reflection off the lake, a day slow with that salty kind of humid, like a curling edge of willow bark, a hydrangea's snowball bloom, wild and thriving.
So this title here, if I forgive myself, today's gender can be anything. And then no mention of gender, no mention of yourself, no mention of forgiveness. How does this poem work for you in the dichotomy of the separation from the title, from the content of the poem?
There was a period of time, and I still feel this way, but it's less of a like mental affirmation that I say to myself every day. Is that I really, it's like if I could pick any gender for myself, it would be like an ambiguous fog, just like in Appalachia, just like not really anywhere and then everywhere at the same time, and you can't really see me, but I'm there, and just like not perceptible, but I'm around. And that's kind of where this came out of. It's just like, what other nature things would I want to be if that could be my gender identity? All of them. The answer is all of them. And also there's something too about like, gender is so made up, and gender is such a construct, and like, what is gender? Well, it can be anything. What am I? Well, I am an animal. And so like I identify as an animal being, and what different ways can that be on any given day? And just the complexity of identity is so much more vast than the gendered words we use for it. And I think I wanted to speak to that a bit more with this poem.
I find it interesting that there's no turtles in these two poems, but there are deer.
Yeah.
They're both deer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thinking,
It's also hydrangeas. I don't know what that's about.
I don't know, but I love a hydrangea.
I mean, me too, but why are they my gender go-tos?
Well,
Something for
probably
me to
because
unpack.
they can change color based off of the acidity of the soil.
We'll go with that. Yeah, that's totally what I meant. Yeah, that was on purpose.
Totally. So queerness, identity, the body, a lot of this revolves around place and also the environment, which is kind of like the part of the conversation that I love really getting to, because also a nature nerd over here. And I love seeing all the ways in which your locale has shown up in these poems. So we got everything. We got Alabama. You lived in Arkansas while you did the MFA, and now you're here in North Carolina area. In what ways has being in these different places contributed to your creative life?
In all the ways. I think, well, in the other poem we read with the stars fell on, that's directly an Alabama reference. The story of the stars falling on the person while she was asleep in her house inspired a license plate tag for a while. Stars fell on Alabama. But I think just like, even the title, right? Like water never ceasing. I go out to the Hiawassee River and just sit there and just stare at it. It's so pretty. Like there's just something so unmovable about nature, and especially I think living out here in the mountains, being just such a force that it just is what brings me back to like groundedness and the centeredness of just pushing back against that societal disability. Like this isn't normal. Well, no one in nature is making me feel like I'm not welcome here,
I would be remiss being from Alabama and you being from Alabama if I did not ask you to read From Muscle Shoals to Mobile on page 69.
Of course.
Because we have to have the go to church or the devil will get you sign.
Also, it's the title poem, so how can
It
you
is.
skip it? This is also one of my favorite poems in the book. From Muscle Shoals to Mobile. Travel the rhythm of the Tennessee, away from its open mouth, past a litany of repetitive Birmingham billboards, past the Peach Park in Clanton, past Go to Church or the Devil Will Get You, past the Montgomery actors playing fools and kings, skulls in hand, through our delta, past the point where medians of pines turn waterlogged cypress, and keep south until the road ends at Alabama's best kept secret, long stretches of beach white as sugar, where, if craned the right way, you can watch the barges come and go and wait starboard. Everything bows to what must remain navigable. Traffic stopped while on the radio a small rain of piano into voice low as a heron hunting smooth and steady. Contralto into bass. And to hear it, go and sit in a slough, quiet save only the annual cicadas and ordinary people in their yards, lawnmowers spitting shreds of grass over their seawall, kudzu vines up to your elbows, and wait long enough. You'll hear the music in the sway and swing, sway and swing, sway of water never ceasing.
So, Alabama's sugar white beaches are a result of all the quartz deposits that are from, like, runoff from the Appalachian Mountains, because Birmingham's the foothills. We're the terminus of the Appalachian Mountain Range, but we have like 32 different ecological regions. Alabama's incredibly diverse. We have we have the most biodiverse watershed on the North American continent. So a lot of diversity in the South. A lot of we actually can't identify all the species of oaks that we have because they hybridize so rapidly. And so you look up at an oak, you're like, I mean, it's like this, but it could also be like this, right? Which leads me to like gender and identity and queerness and diversity and how it finds such a root and a home in the South and how things are interconnected. So especially like with Hurricane Helene when it came through and everything, the French Broad dumps into the Tennessee River. The Tennessee River comes through north of Alabama, dumps into the Mississippi, and then on into the Gulf. And then Gulf waters go across to the Atlantic. So like the entire world is bound together by a network of diversity. And so we will speak to the ways in which diversity of nature, ecology, queerness, advocacy, in what ways are you wanting to take up space with all of these words?
I think exactly how you put it, just like the idea that all these things are connected. Like we can't, even if we want to, the idea of individualism is a myth. None of us are ever separate from not only each other, but from the world that we live in. And the more we try to ignore that, I think the worse off we all are, for sure. I think that's kind of one of the main things that I come back to a lot when I think about how all these things go together. And then also like the role acceptance can play in those things too, just like not judging the way nature doesn't judge us.
Right?
Yeah.
You've had a lot on your plate with like putting this book out into the world. What does it mean to you to have this in this form?
Finally did it. Made it.
Yay.
I wrote all these. Yeah, it's been a long time coming. I think like the oldest poem in here is like 7 years old now. And it was written, I think in the MA, the oldest poem in here. And then all of them, except that one, came right after that MA. Something about like graduating from the MA, I think you also experienced this too. It's like a flood of creativity.
Oh no, I was the opposite.
The opposite? Okay, no, yeah.
I didn't write.
That was how I was right after the MFA. But after the MA, I was like, oh, I can write about this now.
No, I'm about to finish up the MFA and I have so much to write. After the MA, I didn't write for years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting how that works.
Isn't it fun?
Creativity.
Right? With that being said though, do you have other projects on the horizon? How are you sustaining yourself right now?
I've got that translation project that is in a perpetual state of being worked on and off. There's at least one more poetry collection that is being put together. There's 2 more, or it's 1 more, or it'll stay being 2 more.
They're teasing me.
We'll see how it goes.
Bring it on, dude.
It was
Bring
a question that led to a teaser though, so you asked for it.
Yeah, okay. That's pretty typical of our friendship.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for all of this. I'm going to give you the chance. Were there any poems that you wanted to read that I have not asked of you to read? There's one left, but that I in particular want. But
It's the one that you want.
it's I want the opposite of fear is trust, because that's my favorite
Okay.
in all of this, but were
Okay.
there any others that you wanted?
We
Or
can.
are there any shout out requests from the audience that you're like, oh, I want this one read?
We can do that one and then finish on meditation on survival.
Perfect.
Cool. What page did you say that one was on?
Page 40.
As you said it, I had turned to it. I was like, oh, there it is.
Let's see.
Yeah. I actually wrote this one after a trip up here to Bryson City. And we had just went walking around on the road to nowhere. If any of y'all have been up there, Kelly's like, yeah, I have. It's really cool. It's just this like big creepy tunnel, and then you walk through the tunnel, and there's this long like hiking trail. It's so pretty.
Oh, I love the tunnel.
I know you love the tunnel. You should go. Wouldn't be too far off your way back home.
No, but I do gotta get my rental back by 11:30
Okay,
p.m.
well, logistics. The opposite of fear is trust. When I was still young, I thought the trees at the end of my parents' street came alive each night. That every tree branch was a snake waiting to reach down and pluck the bike helmet off my head. That a cup of orange juice could really boost my immune system enough to keep me out of the hospital. That the sun welcomed each morning's long, slow stretch into sky as much as anyone does the day's first yawn. Today, on an isolated mountain road, freshly single and the Cumberland Gap between us, I learned how to feel my hands touch the earth and feel anything besides hurt again. I found myself afraid of every possibility, of a scorpion under each rock, of rattlesnakes waiting in every pile of autumn leaves to fang my foolishly exposed ankle. What I'm saying is, I've always lived my life on a razor's edge, always sure the next moment ready to crosshatch blood from the arches of my feet. But the water that springs from these mountains is the most naturally pure on earth, or so I read somewhere. I hold my shoes, wade through the creek, and wait for nothing bad to happen. Little stream that runs right off the parking area there. Recommend putting your feet in it. Feels nice, very cold. All right, one last one. I like to end this one because it ends on a little bit of hope, and there's so much like medical trauma conversation in this whole thing. I think ending on hope is nice. Meditation on survival. A heron stalks by the window, and dewdrops form on grass. A smattering of light this sweat-soaked August. Lavender bedroom walls melt like a slow day's sunset into Payne's incessant and insistent gray. A softened sand dollar, or mangrove trees, with their tangle of roots in endangered sand dunes, or rainbow arches above the ocean. Everything is improbable. Thanks for being here and interviewing me and coming out and driving up and doing this, Hayden.
You're very welcome. Congratulations on your collection. There you have it, folks. Please make sure to patronize Firestorm. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for listening, y'all.
Thank y'all.
Goodbye. I don't know how to end this.
You can.